Right, so this is my portable workbench. So I'm sure a lot of you use these if you don't have a workshop like me. They do usually come with like chipboard tops. I left mine outside and it swelled up, so I had to replace it, and all I had at the time was this pallet wood, and it's quite thin, so I replaced it with that. But there's not much of a surface there to work with, and even on the original wood tops with the dog holes in, they're not very big. So I'm planning, I've got some really thick wood, this stuff, found it in a skip, and it's a little bit like scaffold board, but it's not quite as big. Solid pine, and I was thinking of somehow changing those tops for this kind of stuff, and increasing the length as well of the bench, making it a bit wider, and that should make it a bit sturdier, heavier, sort of less vibration when you're working on it. That's the plan. I'll lose a bit of the depth here of the clamp system, but I'm not too bothered about that. This will actually, it'll be so thick, it will allow me to actually put an outside clamp on for certain jobs. So yeah, I'm going to increase the width of it a little bit, and it's going to increase the depth, make it a little bit higher as well, because they're quite short. So we'll see how that goes.
Okay, so the first thing to do on this project was to use a chisel and just gouge out the wood around those bolts to get the bolts out of this like temporary pallet wood that I've used. And I've got a socket in there now, and I'm just getting that bolt out. And then you can see the track mechanism underneath, and there's some plastic blocks that the wood was sitting on. I'm just going to throw those out, don't need those for this project. So there you can see the track mechanism, and I'm turning the handle to put the track right at the end on both sides, just to align everything when I put the wood on. Just make sure those are the same. And now I'm just using the old pieces of wood as a template, and I'm going to make the cuts on this really chunky pine wood that I found in a skip. So unfortunately I don't have a sliding miter saw, but that's okay. I'll just turn the wood around and cut either side to make the cut, which worked out fine. And this wood is much heavier, thicker, stronger than the original wood would have been on the original bench when it was purchased. So now this part, I'm making some lines here to find out the centre of those tracks. So I've put a line either side of the track and then found the centre. I've drawn a line down the centre part so that I know exactly where those bolts go. And now I'm just measuring the distance between the centre of the bolt hole and the end of the track, and then I'm matching that up on that middle centre line that I've drawn. And now I'm just going to drill those holes. So it's a bit fiddly, it takes a bit of time to get it accurate, but once it's done, it's done. So it's well worth getting it spot on. There probably are easier ways of doing it, but that's the way I did it. So there's the original bolt, and I'm just checking if it's long enough. And it is long enough, so I'm going to use the original bolt. I was going to use some fresh new bolts, but I found those to be just fine. So now I'm just greasing up those tracks while I've got access to them. And I thought it would be a nice touch to remove those plastic nuts that were on the the bench originally, which I used to lock it in place after you folded it out, and I replaced them with some wing nuts. So I've got a washer here, so I'm going to use these washers to really clamp those chunky pieces of wood down nicely to the bench. So for that I need to cut a recess so that the washer can fit along with the head of the bolt flush into that wood. So now I'm just cutting that out, and I'm just checking how deep I need it to go. Ideally it'd be better to use a table drill, like a pillar drill for this, be more accurate, but I don't have one, so I'll just use my hand drill. So as you can see now, I'm just putting that first one in, and the top of the bolt is nice and flush with the surface of the wood. So now I'll just repeat the process for the second piece of wood and make those lines again. So I'll match them up with the first piece, draw them again with the set square, and then again I find where the bolt holes need to go by measuring the centre of the hole with the edge at the end of the track. And you might notice that this side of the track, where the end of the clamp is, there's some protruding pieces. The bolt holes actually protrude, so I'll have to drill a recess for that, and you'll see that in a moment. There's that, what I was talking about, that protruding part of the bolt hole, and I'm just matching it up with a bit so that I can drill a recess on the underside of this piece of wood so that it fits in there nicely. And then what that does is it helps the wood stay in position when you're using the clamp mechanism, so nothing goes out of line. So now that I've done that, I'm just going to grease up the surface of the metal there, just to help the wood slide a little bit when you use the clamp mechanism. And I'm also greasing the track and the bolt holes and the bolts as well. So now I'm just putting the wood on over those protruding pieces, making sure they line up nicely. And they turned out to be a perfect fit, so I was lucky there. So now it's time to drill the recess again, as I did before, for the washers and the heads of the bolts. Again, I'm just checking on the depth. It's a bit tricky to work out because there's a thickness to that washer and there's a thickness to the head of the bolt as well, so I'll just take it a little bit at a time until it's just right. I'm just greasing up those bolts before they go in. I just needed a little bit of persuasion, nice tight fit, but it all lined up perfectly in the end, and those washers really helped to strengthen it all up. So next thing to do was to get some rough sandpaper ready and give it a blast with the random orbital sander. Just trying to get that surface smooth and the edges. And there it is so far. So that's with the clamp mechanism closed up. So now I'm just hand finishing it with some more sandpaper, a finer grade, I think probably 120 grit, that one. Just going around all the corners and the edges. I'm just giving it a brush off just to get all those sawdusty bits out of the holes, ready for staining it. So I went back and neatened up these holes that I'd cut earlier on with a little chisel. And that's it so far. It's coming along quite nicely. So the next thing to do was to stain it. I've got some teak garden furniture stain there. That's some stain I got last autumn in a sale, really cheap, because the can was all dented. But because it's not edible, it's not food, it doesn't matter. So I bought it, and it's not too easy to work with. It's quite thick, but it gave a nice layer of protection. So, and it come out a nice colour as well. So this bench may spend some time outside without a cover on it. So I just wanted to make sure that wood was protected, just to ensure it lasts a bit longer than it would usually. And I just took my time to make sure I got that stain really worked into all the nooks and crannies. So while that was drying, I went ahead and removed, there's two sort of steel plates which help with the structure of the bench, and I removed those to paint them, to sand them down and paint them, and I removed the bolts and found that they could do with being replaced really, because a lot of them were quite rusty. So I took those support pieces off, ready to give them a good sand. And I'm painting it with some matte black enamel, like metal enamel paint, oil-based paint. And I also did the same for the frame. Give it all a good sanding down, and painted it with some of that matte black enamel, and that would give it a nice key for when I painted it with the gloss later on. And for that black gloss, I just gave it put some white spirit in there to thin it down a bit, just to make it easy to work with. Originally I got this bench from my dad. He had two for some reason, so he had a spare one for me. And I've had it for about 6 years, and I don't know, God knows how long he's had it for. So it's already really old, but structurally it's fine. So it is all really cosmetic. So there you can see I'm just giving it that layer of gloss paint. And it's probably a bit too warm today to use wood gloss because it was quite hard to work with. So if you're going to paint with gloss. Just keep an eye on what the temperature is. If it's a really hot day, I probably wouldn't do it. Just wait for a cooler day. So now I'm just adding to those wood tops. Now that they're dry, I'm adding a layer of yacht varnish, and that really soaked in nicely and gave a nice like waterproof seal. Again, not necessary, but I did have some, so I thought it was good to add. I could have added an extra layer of stain, but I liked the colour that it was at, so I wanted to leave that alone. So there's those old bolts that I removed. You can see quite a few of them have got rust on them, so I thought going forward I'll replace them with some new nuts and bolts that I had. And the old bolts were the flathead types, which I'm not fond of, so these new ones were like a Phillips head, much easier to screw in. So now, after everything's dry, I'm just replacing those support braces and fixing them with those new bolts and nuts. So it wasn't a really fast project. It took a while. I just wanted to get it back up to a really good standard. Not necessary, I suppose. You could just replace the top if you wanted to, but as I took the top off, I kind of got a bit carried away and thought I'll just do the whole thing, just paint the whole thing. And it turned out quite nice in the end, so that should last me a good while. And at the moment, as I said at the beginning, I don't have a woodworking shop where I've got my own bench set up, so I do most of my work on this outside one. So there's the finished result. I was really pleased with how it turned out. And as you can see where the nuts and the washers are, I added some black gloss to those as well, just for some extra protection. So that's brought the bench back to like a new bench. And there you can see that layer of lacquer, that yacht varnish has dried nicely. So if you found this video useful, please leave me a like and also comment, or if you've got any questions, please let me know, and please also consider subscribing for more videos. So I'll see you next time.